is an extremely tragic thing. It's probably much worse than it could be if we were properly integrating IEHPs into the system. If we are not able to come to some sort of a solution around how to address these healthcare horrors, we are in for it, my friends. But I'm very grateful for all of the ways in which I've been cared for by our system. But I think what terrifies me is how stretched our system already is right now today, and just how much more complicated it's going to get. All right, everybody. This is the All of You podcast, where we sit down with all of you. And today we are actually extending the olive branch to the Canadian healthcare system. In an episode that I've been referring to as the Halloween horrors of healthcare, or healthcare Halloween horrors. I don't know. Anyways, when you come across an olive green wig and you kind of like dressing up and being a little bit silly, I just thought this would be a really fun opportunity to sit down with you and talk to you a little bit about some of the horrors, horrors, that we are facing in the Canadian healthcare system. And maybe along the way, I can give you some of my own lived experiences and some of the things that I've observed and, I don't know, just been a part of in the healthcare continuum. Because as you know by now, I have worked in healthcare since I was just a teenager, just a wee little teen. And that's like 24 years. So I'm sure you can imagine the tales of the crypt keeper. The tales that I have, been a part of, witnessed, seen, observed, the stories that have been told to me. And what better way to start off this episode than to talk a little bit about some of the superstitions that we have in healthcare. So if you've worked in a hospital or in a long-term care home, I'm sure this is in any sort of inpatient setting, but when it is a full moon, you prepare. You prepare for the full moon because the saying is like the weirdos come out on the full moon, and you can almost guarantee that on a full moon, your emergency department is going to be exploding. There's going to be something weird and wonderful, wacky happening. And I don't know that there's any kind of scientific explanation for this, but it's just sort of an unspoken thing that we talk about in healthcare as well. Is it the full moon? Why is this happening? And we blame it on the moon. And being a Cancer as an astrology sign, we actually follow the moon with our cycles and our moods and stuff. If you're an astrology girly, you know what I'm talking about. But there is something to be said about the moon and the tides and how people's moods shift with the moon. And I think, if there isn't a scientific explanation for it, maybe we can blame it on the stars and the powers that are associated with whatever makes astrology a thing that we talk about and watch tarot card readers on YouTube for. Maybe I'm the only one who does that. If you have ever had an obsession with tarot card readers, please put a comment in the comments down below. Let me know who your favorite tarot card reader is. This is spooky, right? Tarot card reading. All right, so let's take a little bit of a turn. Now, if you're listening to this, you either work in the Canadian healthcare system currently, you are dreaming about a career within the Canadian healthcare system, or maybe you used to work in healthcare, but you have retired, or you changed careers, or I don't know, maybe you started a not-for-profit and a podcast. I don't know. But either way, something brought you here today because you want to also have an understanding of some of the horrors that we are currently facing across our continuum of care in Canada. So as an instructor, I normally would have a slide deck or something, but because we try to do things really unscripted around here, the only thing I've done is go to my trusty dusty ChatGPT friend over here, and all I typed in was, what are some of the horrors of healthcare in Canada today in 2024? That was all I typed. So the response was, there are several pressing challenges within Canada's healthcare system. No kidding, right? And while the system remains strong in many aspects, there are significant issues causing concern across the country. Some of the key horrors being faced today include the nursing and physician shortages. Well, yeah, this is an extremely tragic thing. This is certainly a problem that is probably much worse than it's probably much worse than it could be if we were properly integrating IEHPs into the system. If we were bringing them here for what they are intended to be here for, and maybe bridging their education a little bit better. And I don't know, I don't know why my dogs are deciding maybe it's a full moon. No, it's not. Anyways, the horrors of healthcare, going back to the horrors of healthcare. One of the primary ones that comes up is the staffing shortages, specifically when it comes to nursing and physicians. Now, if we were properly integrating IEHPs into our healthcare continuum, the way we've been sort of told that's what, we're bringing internationally trained professionals here for a reason. It was to integrate them. And we're not integrating them. All of our doctors and nurses and pharmacists and physiotherapists, all of them are working at grocery stores and Walmart and Shoppers Drug Mart and Wendy's and Taco Bell, and they are not taking care of our elderly. They are not working as PSWs. They are not administering medications. They're just not. They're just not here doing what they should be doing here. And so I'm not really sure what the government's plan is, because by restricting internationally trained professionals to get PR, or making it very difficult for professionals to get PR, I don't know exactly how we're going to staff things around here, because there aren't enough young Canadians, young domestic students who are choosing to take the route of becoming a nurse or becoming a doctor, or, because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of money. It's a lot of school. It's a lot of selling your soul to your education and your career. Like, think about it. If you start med school fresh out of high school, you go to a pre-med program, I don't even know what the heck you have to do. I'm sure you have to write your MCATs or something. Years of education, like at least 7 years of education, and then you get to be a resident, and then you get to, climb the totem pole of bureaucracy as it relates to becoming a physician. And you start at the bottom, like you literally start at the bottom. And I think, like, from what I know from Grey's Anatomy, you're doing scut work, like the work that the surgeons or the, full-time surgeon or full-time specialist or whatever, you're doing the stuff that they don't have time to do. right? And you're spending the most time with the patients and that kind of thing. And the unfortunate thing is internationally trained healthcare professionals, they come with a lot of transferable skills and previous knowledge and working with people, right? They come with that. But what they don't have exactly is the Canadian credential and the Canadian experience, that we talk a lot about. So nursing and physician shortage, it's a nightmare. It's terrifying. It's worse than Silence of the Lambs. Like, absolutely. Hello, Clarice. Like, hello, Canadian healthcare system. Like, we got to do something, Our system is not changing quick enough for how fast our elderly population is, coming up the system, and how people are aging, but the resources and the man-woman power, people power to take care of people is not, it's just not keeping up, And this is something that I've been entrenched with for, the 12 or 13 years that I've been in acute care. Is we just keep seeing the population expand within regions and the infrastructure within our hospitals. We just got approval in the last couple of years in the region that I live in for us to start the planning to identify a site and maybe even break ground. I don't know if that's happening yet, but we just got approval from the government within the last couple of years to start building a hospital. But we needed a new hospital in a lot of regions in Canada. We needed new hospitals like yesterday, or I don't know, 10 years ago. And the infrastructure within our hospitals was designed at a time when our population was not, what it is today. And we're keeping people alive a lot longer, but we're keeping them alive through medical and pharmacological and surgical treatment, interventions. And so while the ability for us to keep people alive longer has expanded and, advanced at an alarming rate, considering how much has changed even in just 50 or 60 years, the infrastructure hasn't followed along with it. And so now we have, this aging population, people are staying alive longer, their care needs are a lot more complex, and as we sort of see this population aging, we see the number of people who are choosing to take this on as a profession, declining. So we should see these things kind of moving up together simultaneously. In a perfect world, we would see the number of people who are inspired to go into the business of helping people. We would see that increase. But sadly, as we've talked about and as we continue to talk about, the business of helping people, especially vulnerable, old, smelly old people, sorry to the smelly old people, but that's kind of the reality. Is when you get to be old, you start kind of falling apart. And speaking of, smelly, when people get old, their skin breaks down and they're a lot more susceptible to bed sores and, just some horrific things that happen to your skin for breakdown. And, want to talk about another healthcare horror, let's talk about unstageable wounds, or wounds that have maggots in them, or wounds that smell so badly that you have to go to the coffee shop in your facility that you work and ask them for coffee grounds so that you can put used coffee grounds in the room of the patient whose wound smells so horrific, that it's bringing people nearly to, retching, because that's how putrid it is. That's a healthcare horror. The definition, we're talking, maggot-infested wounds. Doesn't get much worse than that, really. But these are the things, these are the things that nurses and doctors, have to be able to stomach and treat. And, this goes without saying, but there are people in this world who are making millions on billions of dollars who I bet you have never smelled a unstageable wound in a healthcare setting. And heaven forbid you ever ask them to do that. I'm sure their response would be abso-friggin-lutely not. And, the recognition that we don't give to healthcare professionals who are responsible for taking care of people who are in their most vulnerable, most vulnerable states. I think that people who take care of bodily functions and take care of people at the end of their lives and take care of your wounds, like your gaping infected wounds, like why are we not paying those people $7 trillion a year? Like, it's so strange to me. It's so strange to me that the system that literally keeps our population alive is, I don't know. Now, we're not out here saying that we want you to start banging pots and shit. Okay, that's not what I'm even implying remotely. But what I am suggesting is that, maybe we need to take a good, hard look at who is quite literally keeping our population alive and possibly, be paying those people appropriately and recognizing their contributions in a way where you actually feel like you are appreciated and not just a number, on an HR list, somebody that's easily replaceable. And again, this is my soapbox, okay? And I know that a lot of what I'm saying is very preachy, and I'm, really imposing my beliefs on to this sort of platform. But I just feel like we do not give enough credit to the people who are quite literally keeping humanity afloat. And so that's horrific to me. And that falls under the Halloween healthcare horrors classification strategy, in my opinion. So just going back to ChatGPT, so that was healthcare worker shortages and burnout. Wow. Well, burnout crisis. I am going to quote Nirvana, Kurt Cobain, "It's better to burn out than to fade away." Well, you know what? I think that when you identify that what you're experiencing is burnout, I think you can try to come to some sort of strategy for how to overcome burnout. And maybe that means completely turning your world upside down and pursuing a completely different career. Or maybe that means, leaving the job with a toxic work culture. Or maybe that means, going back to school and expanding your skill set and expanding your knowledge. Or maybe that means going and practicing your skill or your trade in a completely different culture or a completely different part of the world. And for those of you who have done that or who are doing that, like, hats off to you, because there can possibly not be anything more horrific that a person can go through than moving their entire life, trying to establish themselves somewhere, to build a career for yourself. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, you don't know. And then, to come into a culture where there is a lot of entitlement within our patient populations. And it's not a secret that nurses and PSWs are physically and verbally assaulted regularly, sexually assaulted even. I had a situation a few years ago where this young clinical extern was being verbally sexually assaulted, however you want to phrase it, by a patient. And she didn't even realize that she had the right to stand up for what this patient was saying and, doing. because she just thought, well, he's sick and he's in the hospital. And it's like, no, this person is perfectly capable. This person knows what they're doing and what they're saying, and it's wrong. And there's this strange mentality of patients, like, it's almost as though when they come in and they're admitted as a patient, it's like they completely forget all respect. I don't know. It's just very strange. It's very strange how much abuse and how often patients are so disrespectful to staff. Like, that's part of my job, right? It's been part of my job for the last 7 or 8 years. Oh my gosh, longer than that. It's like whenever there's a complaint, the staff are just at the point where they don't want to deal with it. So they escalate it to leadership. And then we're just constantly chasing our tail because, the family will be labeled as difficult. And, then the family resents the staff. It's just this vicious sort of cycle that you can find yourself falling in sometimes. And I think a huge part of the burnout has to do with that. It's just like how many patients and the demand and the complexity and, you're running ragged on your shifts. Like, it's not as though, you work a 12-hour shift and you for sure get every single one of your breaks. Like, how many times have I had conversations with healthcare professionals who are like, I don't know if I've eaten today. I don't think I drank any water today. I don't think I've sat down in 7 hours. I don't think I've peed today. And that's horrific too. Like, so going back to the horror of the career of, working in healthcare, it's like, how do I sell this? How do I sell this to some 17 or 18-year-old young person who's trying to make a decision about what they want to be when they grow up? Like, I don't know if that's the right thing. Like, I don't know if we should be saying, do you want to be a nurse? Yeah, it's really friggin' hard, and you're going to have to deal with maggoty wounds and smelly bowel movements, and you're going to have to bathe some perverted old guy, who makes sexual comments about you. Like, that doesn't sound like a fun time. That doesn't sound like a career that I would be running to sign up for, I don't know. I digress. Let's go back to our list. Long wait times. Oh, that is a horror, isn't it? Yeah. So every semester, especially if it's students that I've never taught before or that I knew are like brand new to a program, I'll specifically say like, so what do you know about the Canadian healthcare system? And you know what? Usually the number one thing is that people will say? The wait times, yeah. That it's free, that our healthcare system is free. That's not true. And the wait times, right? And I try to navigate that very carefully because there are just so many things that contribute to the wait times. But I mean, primarily it's lack of resources in the community to be able to get patients out of the hospital swiftly and efficiently and well supported. So people end up waiting in hospital for 100 years before they can move out back into the community, whether it's returning to their home, whatever that looks like to them, or whether it's being institutionalized to a retirement home, if you can afford it, or a long-term care home, if you're crisis enough. Because you can only get into long-term care anymore if you're deemed a crisis. And so I guess the biggest horror of all of this is you can do everything right. You can do everything right. You can get on the wait list for long-term care. You can know that you're going to be waiting, 3 or 4 or 5, however many years. But now the horror is that so many people in the community are, aging and their care needs are complex and their dementia and their cognitive impairments are so complex that the only people getting in are those people who are at the end of their care, ability to do anything for themselves, okay? And family is not able, or they don't have family to care for them. And so they're either total care, meaning if somebody doesn't change them and feed them, they will die. Or they are so complex behaviorally that they're homicidal or suicidal or at risk of, wandering out into the middle of a snowstorm without shoes or a coat, and then they freeze to death in a snowbank, because that's happened a time or two in our system, and then when you get into long-term care, you have this combination of frail, elderly, demented people. And now we have this aging population of people with severe mental health needs, because we don't institutionalize our mental health population anywhere different. And so now it's the frail, demented, elderly person and the person who's now aging into long-term care who has schizophrenia, or some bipolar or schizoaffective disorder. And now you're seeing sort of two dichotomies of patients. Like, it's very unusual. And it's been a while since I've looked up the exact statistics, but the rate of people who are developing cognitive impairments that are leaving them now, in a state where their behaviors are unmanageable. Think back like 150 years ago. If there was some person who lost their marbles, they straight up lost their marbles, okay? Like 150 years ago, we were not dealing with psychogeriatric resource consultants and BSO, like Behavioral Supports Ontario. Like, we weren't taking care of these people. These people didn't survive. Like, these people, they didn't survive, okay? And so now these people are staying alive longer, but I question you to ask yourself, like, at what quality of life? They don't recognize their spouse. They don't recognize their children. They don't even know where they are. They still think their parents are alive. Maybe their parents have been dead for 30 or 40 years, and every single day they're asking for their mom or their dad. And it's like, you have to enter into their reality. You don't get to say, like, your mom died 50 years ago. It's like, no, you're going to go home later and we'll give them a call. And it's very sad. And listen, I'm not saying that we should go out here and like undo everything that we've done to keep people alive and, what have you. But what I'm saying is, at what cost to their quality of life? I don't know. That's a horror for me, is living so long that I don't recognize any of the people that I love. And I'm institutionalized, and I have a certain number of incontinent products that I get to use every day. And I don't get to pick the food that I eat. The food that I eat is picked for me. That's a horror. And I hope that every single one of you watching this and listening to this, you live a long, healthy, wonderful, able-bodied, cognitively capable life. But the sad reality is that probably more than half of you will have some kind of a cognitive or physical impairment at some point in your life that's going to leave you reliant upon our Canadian healthcare system. And who the hell is gonna take care of us? Who? Boo. It's kind of scary, right? Kind of scary. Longest wait times I've ever seen, like, long. Sometimes mental health patients, because we don't have an abundance of mental health beds in our system, sometimes mental health patients will wait in the emergency department for like not 10 days. That's an exaggeration. Maybe 5 days, 5 to 7 days. If there's kind of a plan and we're trying to integrate them back out into the community. If you admit someone, it makes them a lot harder to, get them back out or get them to their home hospital or something like that. But I've seen many, many patients, especially if you're isolated for something. So here's another horror for all my infection control people out there. Like, we isolate for a lot of things. MRSA, C. diff, ESBL, VRE, CPE, you name it. We isolate for many, many, many things. And when you're in the emergency department, the curtain that's dividing you between the person that's next to you, I don't know if you know this, but it's not a magical barrier to prevent infectious disease from traveling, between the curtain. And so when you have a full emergency department and you've got dozens on dozens on dozens of people who are, utilizing this department, we're just passing germs around to all of each other. And in some emergency departments, they were originally designed to maybe only support 50 or 60 people. And there will be times when you'll have 112 or 120 people in this emergency department with one washroom. Horror! The horror! I don't know. And so, then you get them up to the inpatient room, and then they finally get to go into a private room where they can be properly isolated. And then, they've already exposed people. And anyways, there's a lot of horrors that happen when it comes to spreading of disease. And we just went through a pandemic. I don't need to go deep into the weeds with you on that. You get it. Sickness gets passed. And when you don't have the infrastructure to properly isolate people, then more and more things get passed and more people get sick and more of our resources get utilized and more nurses become burnt out because of the time that it takes to doff and don PPE and, the pressure that comes along with when an outbreak happens on your unit or in your facility. And, in order to come off of outbreak, it's a really difficult thing, heightened awareness and heightened cleaning and a lot more time. And anyways, horror. Also, wait times for surgeries. This is another one. Specialist appointment and surgeries. Woof. And to get an MRI, or a CT scan. You gotta be dying to get a CT scan. And to get an MRI, you really gotta be sick. Yeah. I don't even know. I was just going to say, I had to have an MRI last year and I went to the hospital and they were like, yeah, you need an MRI. You're going to have to go on the wait list for that. And I was like, okay, how long is it going to be for an MRI? Thinking a few weeks, but months, a couple of months, maybe even nearly 3 months. February, March, April, May. Few months passed, and I ended up going to my family doctor and saying, they said that I was supposed to get this MRI at the hospital, but it's been all of this time and I still haven't heard anything. So then they looked into it and it was I was still way down on the list for this MRI. So my doctor was like, no, thank you. We're going to send you, somewhere separate. And thank goodness she did, because we were actually able to figure out what the hell was wrong with me. And if we hadn't had the MRI before we went in for the second or third or whatever surgery it was, they were just operating blindly without the results of this MRI. And anyways, this was horrific for me as a patient. It's not horrific to the surgeon. I think that there's sometimes a little bit of a disconnect between how much anxiety goes into waiting. I have major health anxiety. I don't know if I would push it as far as to say hypochondria, but there are some times when I am not in the right mindset about my health. And, every pain, every whatever, I think it's a tumor, I think it's cancer, I think it's an autoimmune disease, it's bad. And when you have this, and when you are somebody who's especially anxious, and then you have to wait for 100 years for things, turns a mountain into a molehill. And I don't know. It's not good. It's not good. To anybody out there who does not have health anxiety and you're just like able to go with the flow, like I am so jealous. I'm so jealous of you. Oh, wow. It's really horrific in here. So mental health crisis. Yeah. Well, you know how I feel about mental health and how we don't talk about it enough, and how, think about this too, like 150 years ago, the people who were crazy, not just the people who were old and, senile, it's like the people who were crazy were tortured, the ancient psychiatric institutions, the insane asylums, if you're into this kind of thing, like the history of medicine and whatever, there was this it was a show on, I think Showcase or HBO. It's called The Nick. Clive Owen was one of the surgeons, and it was based out of a hospital in New York called the Knickerbocker. And it was at the turn of the 18th to the 19th century. So I think it took place in like 1902 to, I don't know, maybe 1912 or something. And it was just when they were introducing electricity into hospitals. And one of the very first episodes, not to spoil alert, whatever, but like one of the very first episodes is them going through the process of learning how to do cesarean, like C-sections. And there are some very interesting things that happen in that show that after I watched it, binge watched it. It's such a good show. I'm probably going to have to watch it again now. But after I binge watched it, I looked up a lot of these things, and a lot of them are very factual. And so 1902, like we're again, 125, 130 years ago, things were so different. And I don't know why I'm so fixated on worrying about this now, but I just keep thinking, like, how much is our healthcare system going to need to change? What's going to change? How quickly? I just saw a thing on the weekend too. It was like, we've successfully been able to communicate dream to dream communication with humans. And like, I don't know if I'm horrified and terrified of this, or if my mind is blown and I'm just excited for the future, but scared at the same time. It's like, if we're able to communicate dream to dream among humans, will we be able to then communicate with people who are in comas or brain dead? Because do brain dead people dream? And will we finally know that? Ooh. It's kind of scary, but kind of cool, but kind of scary, but kind of cool. I don't know. Aging infrastructure, I've already kind of talked about. I could literally teach a 27-year course on the aging infrastructure, and, having grown up working in long-term care. There's some like circumstances where you've got people living in long-term care who come from all different walks of life. Okay. Like, as I was saying, we've integrated mental health, severe mental health, along with cognitive impairment, along with severe physical disability. And I remember one of the very first complicated cases that I was working on to try to get somebody into long-term care. She wasn't just your regular run-of-the-mill person. She was technically palliative, okay? And palliative is end of life. But the reason why she was palliative was another healthcare horror. So let me paint a picture for you. You have a middle-aged woman who has developed a mental illness where one of her coping strategies when she's manic or, in whatever psychosis or psychological state she finds herself in, her coping strategy is to swallow things, sharp things, okay? And so for a couple of years, surgeons, every time this crisis would happen where she would swallow whatever, blades or whatever, surgeons were going in and surgically removing whatever articles or multiple articles that she was swallowing, and they would remove them. And by the time the fifth incident rolled around, the surgeons basically said, like, we cannot operate on you, because the scar tissue is so messed up in your abdomen, you're more than likely going to die on the table. And so, unfortunately, this did not stop this woman. And the next time she comes into the hospital, she has 5 steak knives. Let me say that again. 5 steak knives in her gut. Okay. And thank God these incredibly talented surgeons were able to laparoscopically remove 2 of them, but 3 of them remained. And so you can imagine they said that she was going to perforate at any time. And she was palliative in a sense that we were just kind of waiting for the perforation. But then she lived. And she lived in the hospital some more, and she lived in the hospital some more, and she lived in the hospital some more, and she never perforated. And so at what point do you say, well, you can't live here. You can't live in the hospital. She had swallowed a couple of other things while she was in the hospital. One of them was like a whole pill bottle of Tylenol, but like the whole bottle, kind of counterproductive. They were able to laparoscopically remove that as well. We couldn't, to give her things to do in her room and stuff. It was like you wanted to give her pens and things to do Sudoku and word searches and stuff, but you couldn't because she was at risk of swallowing it. So unless she was under supervision, right? And so tell me, how do you fill out an application to get someone who has steak knives in her belly, who's at risk of perforating at any time? How do you paint a picture to a long-term care home to say, yeah, you can take care of this person? Horror. Healthcare. Horror. I don't know whatever happened to her. I do think we were eventually able to get her into a long-term care home, but it was not without a very significant wait. And we had to show evidence that she was stable, psychologically for a period of time, a long period of time. And we had to have a crisis emergency safety plan in place. And I don't know. I wonder whatever happened to her. But this was a real person. It's a real thing. So the other thing, I guess, that we would consider a horror in our healthcare system is the access to healthcare in rural or remote parts of the country. So the further out you get from city centers, the fewer and fewer and fewer resources there are available to you. So, a very good friend of mine from, my teens and early 20s, she went to school to become a nurse, and she did some travel nursing, and she made very good money doing it. And she took these contracts in the northernmost parts of our country. And, some of the things that she would tell me, there's no doctor. There's a handful of nurses, and you're working out of an army base, and people are coming to you with everything. Stab wounds, gunshot wounds, strokes, babies being born. People were even bringing their dogs. If the dog was hit by a car or something, they would bring the dog to the nursing station. And if you don't have a doctor, but the person who comes to you is critical, you have to stabilize that patient and then arrange for air transport, which thankfully the Canada Health Act includes portability and accessibility. And so basically that means that the government is responsible for delivering healthcare services to you or bringing you to where the healthcare services are. And so this really is beneficial to people who live in the very remote parts of our country, because the government will pay for your air helicopter, your air ambulance to bring you to the nearest hospital that can help you. But it's not just you call the air helicopter and you say, hey, we got a big one, come on down and pick them up. It takes a few minutes. And what do you do in the meantime? How do you keep them alive? And I'm not a nurse, okay? So I can't speak to this. I'm sure there are strategies, and I know they've got a whole plan, Maybe they even have a helicopter out back. I don't know. But what I do know is that there are people who live hours away from a hospital. And they choose that, of course. You can choose to live far away from a hospital, but there are people who don't choose the culture that they're born into. There are people that don't choose the family that they're born into in the part of the country that they are born into. And I think what's really horrific is something that we heard a little bit about this in the media, but I'm thinking specifically of like isolated indigenous reservations and how there was a epidemic there for a while where young people living on these reservations were seeing their circumstances hopeless, and they were engaging in suicide pacts where they literally just did not see a way out of their living circumstances, and it resulted in, you know, small groups of adolescents all deciding just to unalive themselves at the same time because of how horrific their living circumstances were, sadly. I don't know. Horror. Yeah. Pharmaceutical and drug shortages. I don't know. The indigenous healthcare inequities is a big one here. Racism in healthcare. Let's go there. All right, let's go there. I've been in some circumstances where racism has certainly been a contributing factor to the reason why clinician, is not getting along with patient. But I don't even know if the clinician realizes that they have this underlying prejudice or racism. I think it's so, it's like an unawareness because of how you were brought up or the geographical region that you were raised in. Like I was raised in a somewhat small town, small city, and the racism and the ignorance around culture and diversity and equity and inclusion, like there's an ignorance. Again, it's almost like the smaller the town, the smaller, sorry, let me reframe this. It's like the further you get outside of larger city centers, the fewer the resources and the narrower the mind. Okay? The narrower the mind when it comes to culture and diversity and all of those things. So, yeah, when you have a nurse who calls you to the NICU and she's saying like, this patient's being difficult, and you pause for a second and, you get all the information from the nurse, but then when you go into the room and you realize that the patient is of a different culture or different ethnicity, and then you start to think to yourself like, what was the nurse saying? Like, why was the nurse withholding this piece of equipment from this person? Because when I talked to the person and the person expressed to me, like, this is my 6th child. 4 of my children have been in the NICU. I know what I'm doing. I just want the scale in my room with me so that I can weigh my baby to make sure that I'm producing enough breast milk. I don't even know if the nurse knew that this was her 6th child and that 4 of them had been in the NICU, and that she knew her way around caring for a premature infant. Would we have had the same questioning and doubts towards a Caucasian woman who was asking to keep the scale in her room overnight? I don't know. But this is, I don't know if it's ingrained. What's the word I'm looking for? It's like, it's just so deeply rooted in some cultures and geographical areas. And it's a lot, I guess we're a lot like the States too, right? Like there's pockets of racism and pockets of, oh my goodness, and we're heading into this presidential election and who knows what's going to happen with all of that. Anyways, I'm, again, just pushing this narrative of getting comfortable talking about the uncomfortable. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there is no racism in healthcare because there is. Even when it comes to who's getting promoted and who's not, there's racism there. There is, sexism too. Why are the vast majority of executive leadership positions in healthcare held by white men? Maybe that statistic has improved slightly in the last 5 or 10 years or so. I have been seeing a lot more female CEOs, which, hallelujah. Hallelujah for that. But I don't know. Maybe we're just going to, I'm just taking a look at this list. Inconsistent provincial healthcare services. Ugh. I don't know. This is difficult. It's difficult to talk about because I am by no means saying that I am not appreciative for the healthcare that I have had available to me as a Canadian who's been born and raised in Ontario. For the most part, I've been pretty lucky. Like my family doctor, I will never, unless she for some reason says, I'm not allowed to keep you on as a patient because you don't live in Toronto anymore. Like I might seriously consider moving back to Toronto if she tells me that my postal code doesn't align with her postal code catchment. If I have to move back to Toronto to keep my family doctor, I might. I might. I hope that doesn't happen because I'm not ready to move back to Toronto anytime soon. But yeah, finding a family doctor, having a family doctor that you have a good relationship with, who gets you, who she's known me for how long now, right? Like 15 years. And yeah, there's some scary things happening out there. And I'm very, very grateful to be a Canadian. And I'm very grateful for all of the things, and all of you. But I'm very grateful for all of the ways in which I've been cared for by our system. But I think what terrifies me is how stretched our system already is right now today, and just how much more complicated it's going to get. And I just don't know if we are ahead of the curve. So I don't know. Not saying that I support this, not saying that it's the answer, but I do foresee in my crystal ball of whatever. I wish I had a magic 8-ball or something fun like that. We have slinkies and stuff. We don't have anything like a magic 8-ball. Anyways, Christmas is coming. Maybe I'll get a magic 8-ball. But where I'm going with this is I'm scared for the future. I'm horrified for the future, actually. And if we are not able to come to some sort of a solution around how to address these healthcare horrors, we are in for it, my friends. Like all us millennials who are just starting to develop back problems now, and all of you people who are in your 40s who need to get your colonoscopies and your mammograms, like, where are we going to be? Are TikTokers going to be taking care of us? I don't know. But until next time, I guess, this has been the All of You podcast, and this has been the Healthcare Halloween Horrors episode with me, your host, Shannon. And I hope you'll tune in next time because we've got a lot of really incredible episodes coming up in the month of November. Really heavy on the mental health coming up. I've got an emerge nurse who's going to talk all about trauma. I've got a social worker who's worked with schizophrenia patients. I've got an occupational therapist who's extremely passionate and brilliant when it comes to women's mental health and the whole pharmacological side of things from a mental health perspective, which is extremely fascinating to me. Anyways, I hope you'll tune in. The entire month of November has a lot of really fun things happening. And as we come to a close in the year of 2024, OBM will be doing a lot of fun things and announcing a lot of fun things. And I'm excited for the future, not of the healthcare horrors of the future, but for the future in general. So stick around. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.